Why are we here today? Because the Freedom from Religion Foundation on October 12th in 1992 issued this proclamation. Whereas October 12th marks the anniversary of the date on which it was declared in the Massachusetts colony that spectral evidence would no longer be admissible in court, terminating the infamous Salem witch trials. Whereas this declaration by Governor William Phipps of the colony of Massachusetts was the first of its kind requiring that evidence, I lost my place, requiring that evidence admitted in court be observable by the ordinary senses, measurable and replicable. Whereas the declaration forced the immediate termination of the notorious Salem witch trials, since all the convictions invoked such, quote, evidence, unquote, as voices from a deity or specters, including, quote, angels and devils, unquote. Whereas 20 persons were condemned and cruelly executed, 19 hanged, 1 pressed to death, prior to Governor Phipps's declaration. Whereas Governor Phipps wrote that he stopped the proceedings, quote, because I saw many innocent persons might otherwise perish, unquote, including the 52 people with pending cases of witchcraft, all of whom were released within 3 months of his ruling. Whereas of the watersheds of human history, surely one of the most seminal in terms of the elevation of thought from the depths of primal instincts was Governor Phipps's October 12, 1692 edict. Whereas there may be no single day of more significance in tracing the history of human enlightenment and the adoption of the scientific method than October 12, 1692. Whereas there have been many holidays for saints and superstition, but never one commemorating reason, free thought, and state-church separation, we, the people, declare October 12th Freethought Day.
Amen! Amen! October 12th!
October 12th. We're a little bit late,
That's my
but I don't think we could get a brunch together for a Thursday.
Yeah.
May I add something? May I add
Barbara.
something? It was also an important day for the emancipation of women,
Wonderful.
since 95% of all the witches killed were women.
Thank you, thank you. Good point.
Salud.
Well, that's only right.
Okay, I just want to say that I'm going to be extremely brief. I'm sure you're very glad to hear that.
Yes.
But Harold has spoken, or actually had conversations with, the name of his program is Conversations with Channer, to a vast number of people, many of whom are free thinkers, so that makes him a good speaker for us today. You know, I would say he's a good speaker at any time. And he's spoken to so many of these people. It's been for 37 or 38 years. And rather than go through all of his credentials, I said to him, I'm going to take it the easy way. I'm going to start it off with him by saying what he always says to people when they come on to his program in the very beginning. And that is, tell me something about yourself before we get started. And so, tell us something about yourself, and then you can get started.
We'll be happy to talk. Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much. I appreciate very much the invitation to talk to you, talk informally here. I passed out a handout that you could have. I might share a little of my own background. It might be relevant to myself. I don't want to get too much into myself. I want to talk about the influences of certain people. Bucky Fuller, particularly, huge influence in my life, as a Asimov and so forth. Then finally, I want to get down from starting to understanding things in a large, comprehensive way. Bucky Fuller led me to think comprehensively rather than specialized or reductionist, which I'm afraid is a problem with the intellectual situation. But I'm middle class from Detroit, born in 1935, so I'm 76. Thank you, unfortunately, and counting. And they seem to go by so much faster every year somehow. Middle class family, best mother in the history of the universe. I'm partial in that regard. My dad,
Give Alex the credit.
my dad was a lawyer and had been in the class of 1926, University of Michigan Law College, and also did undergraduate work there. I think Leopold and Loeb infamy were his classmates. There were about 40 people in the law school class at his class. And my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, was the first woman ever to graduate from the University of Michigan Medical College. In 1888, she broke the glass ceiling. And we had a woman who stayed with us in the Depression years, 35. It was Depression. A lot of people were in bad shape. Wonderful woman who helped raise me like a second mother in the house. She would do all the cooking, and she was really good. But it wasn't, she became like one of the family. But she was very instrumental as well. But she taught me how to shoot craps when I was 8 years old, and how to read the racing form as an introduction to mathematics, you know, so that was an interesting background. It was an autodidactic family. We had the Encyclopedia Britannica, and we had the Harvard Classics and so forth, and very encouraging of what would be, we would say, critical thinking. And also it became a center for a great number of people to assemble. So it was a very privileged background that I had in a certain sense. And I just mention that because I was always interested in things in a large way. I actually decided, when finally getting the military draft out of the way and that sort of thing, to go at university to study geography. So I'm actually, I guess in terms of nomenclature or something, I'm a geographer. And I think I was interested in geography because geography is something that you can be interested in a lot of a systems understanding and get away with it in terms of a world that is going academically just pell-mell towards specialization, breaking everything down into its component parts rather than thinking systems. And I think I always wanted to just do something. You can be economic geography, political geography, physical geography. You can get away with almost anything and still be interested in, as I am, everything. I've made claim that they ought to have a department at university of everything because everything is interconnected as one system. I love the idea of John Lovelock, is it James Lovelock? The Gaia, the idea of seeing the earth as an organic presence. It's a little bit troubling to a lot of people and everything, but what it is I ended up doing that and that's what I was thinking I was interested in. I had a friend of mine, Joe Friendly, one of the people who produces television with me on the public access realm. Happy to repeat, the public access television multimedia production facility has just had their franchise renewed for a 10-year period into the future, so we have a financing system for independently multimedia production of, I would hope, increasingly intellectually relevant content that can be done at no cost at all to the person that wants to do it and can now be distributed on the internet worldwide. That is going to be a source of a great deal of what would be curriculum in an autodidactic world that I think is emerging, and I always sort of wanted that. Rather than the specialization. But I did geography, I did all the dissertation work, 2 years, how intrepid or foolish I was when I was younger. My wife and I at the time, we drove to Bolivia in a 10-year-old Pontiac car without much money and all that sort of thing, and had about 100 flat tires where you had to pull the whole tire out and pump it up by hand. And went there and did about 1.5 years in Bolivia studying the Aymara Indian culture, which is a cultural heart. It was 4 main things. We'll get to the evolutionary pattern of social systems and so forth. But it's very interesting. We now know from understanding things that we're all Africans. The Homo sapiens species evolved in Africa, and the people had almost certainly and they had migrated out around the world. And there was, without jumping ahead too far, there were 4 main places where they went through the process. 200,000 years ago, I think, is the best guess, the best assessment of when Homo sapien appeared out of Homo habilis in the evolutionary pattern. And for the large part of that, we were wandering in the hunting and gathering cultural state, and so forth. Then it became agriculture. We had wheat and barley in the West, made the basis of food surplus from the food complex plus domestication. So Egypt, Mesopotamia, Europe, and then you had rice in China, you had a mix in the Indus Valley, you had maize in Mexico, and there's a 4th major food complex that gave security from the food quest that made possible civilization. I guess the description of that is urban dwelling. 8,000, 10,000 years ago out of 200,000 years that we've been here on this planet. So those are kind of things I was interested in. But then I was studying, and it's very interesting because the Altiplano of Bolivia is the place where a 4th major food complex and was a cultural hearth that came up through the Paleolithic to Neolithic to civilization. They had a civilization that rivaled the art of the old world at the time of Christ, at the time of at Titicaca. That was very interesting to me as a geographer. And one of the geographers I was inspired by, outside of Humboldt and other writers in geography, it used to be a major curriculum thing in the old curriculum, but we've gotten away from it. Your major schools don't even allow to have such a department anymore because it's too comprehensive. And they want specialization because that's the trend, that's one of the themes. But anyway, that was the 4th major food complex was evolved there. It was the potato, quinoa, and oca, and they developed a unique food source that made a high civilization develop there. It was the furthest from our African roots, a cultural heart, where they developed through to civilization in Tiwanaku and then pre-Tiwanaku. Very interesting work. I was down there for a year and a half, really enjoyed it. It's the Aymara people that Evo Morales now is emerging from and has become the political leader of. They've been treated shabbily, as have most indigenous peoples, by the colonialization process ever since Pizarro and so forth. But now they're emerging. That gets into the modern. But we're trying to get a context, a comprehensive context. And want to get to that, want to get to the political. I have some of that in the current moment. But I get to the point now, that's some of the background. But then that's when I came back to Detroit, where I was home after it was my home still. And on the television then, there was all this, the world had changed enormously. We'd been away 2 years or so. And the world had changed. It was the time of the Beatles. And the hair was down to the backside. And you had the hippie thing going. And you had the Beatles. And there was this thing, there was something blowing in the wind, Bobby Dylan said, that was picked up by a lot of people. And I said, what in the world is this all about? And I did get in touch with some of the people, John Sinclair, Lena Sinclair. John Sinclair was a revolutionary that John Lennon was trying to get out of jail and so forth, all of that. They had an artist workshop colony, and I would go over there just trying to understand what the hell's going on, and everything. And so I got interested in that. But then more to the point perhaps of now, what I'm talking about, or trying to talk about now, was on the television, I believe it was still black and white, I'm not sure. But I can remember a television set in the corner where there was no programming at all. There was a television set with an Indian head test pattern that people would watch, and it was coming. But anyway, on the public television, there were two people that came on, probably on public television. One was Buckminster Fuller, and he blew my mind. He was a comprehensive intellectual of high order. Another one, and the same week came Marshall McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan was a very interesting reader of the arts. He was a great scholar of James Joyce and being able to translate some of the things of that in terms of the effects of media and taking a media analysis. He was brilliant. And they blew my mind, and I just got off thinking about things comprehensively. And so that's the background, okay? I got off, and so I'll get to the. I handed out a paper with my background, and I've done about 3,700 hour-long interviews with many of our intellectuals and so forth, and politicals, and I think the multimedia presentation of information is very important for informing the human consciousness, which I think is going through a qualitative major moment of transformation, even in the evolution of consciousness and universe itself at this moment. I'll mention just briefly, Isaac Asimov was one of those that we did a program with. Very impressed with the man. He was gigantic. His laws of robotics still are what he's remembered for largely, but he was a polymath, a comprehensivist, and he made an assertion that I agreed with, and I had been coming to that conclusion as a university professor for a number of years, that this generation, it's hard to get your mind around in a sense, this generation of the current generation is, he said, it is the defining generation. After 10,000 generations, if we say 200,000 years, that would be 20-year generational span over the long haul. This is the defining generation in terms of the evolution not only of human systems and so forth, but of consciousness itself. And that's the thing that I feel we're living in, that kind of a time, which is a great privilege. It's also a great trauma, because 99.9% of all the species that have ever existed have gone extinct. We now have in our hands, through the extension of consciousness, through what is called, uniquely so, technology and tools, have gotten to a point where we have had sociological, political, economic evolution to the point where the advantage that was given to the various princes down through the ages that the artistic or other communities could give to the political leadership of some weapon system that gave them an advantage over the tribe in the other village, against which they could then attack, steal their grain, become strong, make their tribe strong. It's all called realpolitik. It still rules in terms of the overall understanding of the human condition. And I don't think but there have been qualitative transformations. One last little thing along the line of thinking comprehensively. Amazing time we live in. Every day, if you've noticed, every day there comes over the transom a new revolution in every field, everywhere, and it's coming in exponentially increasing capability for us to have an intellectual understanding of the process of which we are a part. We now have the genome. We now know the way the brain works in a physical sense with neurotransmitters. We didn't know they existed 50 years ago. We're coming to a fruition or end of a gestation period in terms of being able to understand the process of which we are a part. Watson and Crick, Charles Darwin in the 19th century, the Huxleys. We're coming to have a greater understanding. Now it's moving into patterns that are extensions of intellectual understanding and extensions of ourselves. The dialectic might well be, rather than differentiating ourselves from the creatures or from the environment, we're differentiating ourselves from those extensions of ourselves that Mr. McClue and James Joyce wrote about so well. It's those that are now being extended with great exponentially increasing. That line is now going almost L-shaped in terms of what's going on at this moment. It's like a moment in a gestation process of quickening. Women who might have given birth know about a quickening or of a breaking of the water or other metaphors. And so we're actually coming to that kind of a period, and it's good to try and put it into some sort of comprehensive context just for a moment, and then we'll get on to some of the political stuff that mostly makes up all the news that we talk about. String theory. We just then had we had the unified field theory and the quantum mechanics and so forth in terms of physics, and now we get to a point where we had an understanding of things. We have the Wilkinson array, a telescope array, that has given us a picture of the shock wave of the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, only 200,000 years after its occurrence. That's a pretty good measure of being able to take the measure of things by human consciousness. I'm sorry they didn't finance the thing from CERN. They had a telescope array that the financing has been pulled because of the debt ceiling or some damn thing. And Mr. Tyson at the Center for, the American Museum of Natural History is upset with that, so am I, so most of the intellectual world. They would have been able to get a picture of the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago within a nanosecond of its occurrence. It signals a measure of our being able to take the measure of things in a unique way that began maybe with Galileo, or Copernicus had a telescope which they could vaguely see the orbit pathways of Jupiter and set up a paradigm that we're not the center of the universe. Hieronymus Bosch painted all those wonderful paintings of existential angst because their identity was being undercut seriously by that whole development of the intellectual enlightenment and so forth. So this is all part of history. But we now have string theories come along, and I mention it only, and I want to get to some of the other things in a minute. Buckminster Fuller used to cast about. I don't know of any mind better than Buckminster Fuller. If anybody's got a candidate for somebody who's put it better intellectually than Buckminster Fuller in the body of his work, send me a link, please. I would really like to try and do that, but I find that it would nest more in terms of Buckminster Fuller. His thing about an operating manual for Spaceship Earth and his reading of things was absolutely better than Joyce. Better than Joyce, and Joyce was great. But anyway, he used to cast about, as he put it. He had a great sense of humor too. We had a letter from his colleague Thomas Zung that we gave to Marcia, that there's a major display of the Black Mountain work that they did that's in the art gallery currently in New York City. We could make you aware of that. But anyway, he used to cast about, and he would say, what is the purpose, one diversion. Mankind has had the ability to contemplate the larger issues like, what's it all about, Alfie? We've had that, we're blessed or cursed with that ability of self-reflective consciousness, and we have had to suffer, poor humanity. James Joyce said, history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken. The theme of today's talk is we may be on the verge of awakening from that nightmare of history, of injustice by and large, and which continues and is reified in our outdated institutions inherited from history. But Fuller used to cast about from a position of the design science decade research, of understanding the reality in a very large context intellectually. That was 65, 75. But he cast about and he said, is there a purpose? That's something people are interested in. We've had to invent explanations for the large issues, creation stories and so forth and all of that, and we can understand where they have. And I think we ought to give some credence to those because they've been very influential in ethics and other kinds of things that mattered toward a civilized order out of the barbarism in which we were. But we had to have some, Cro-Magnon cave people must have sat and thought, what's it all about? And they would say, well, it was the god of the mastodon, or they would invent some sort of thing. And this has happened largely. I think that's probably what and we have the idea of our demise and so forth, unlike a crocodile or something else. Anyway, he cast about and he said, well, he thought the second law, I'm almost done with this little intro. The second law of thermodynamics, as we're all aware, is that all systems move toward entropy to the limits of a closed system to disarray. And that's the thing that's thought to be operative in universe. Then the question comes, now they got the string theory. And the string theory comes up with Brian Greene and Michio Kaku and so forth, that they're very well, the mathematics is elegant, I understand, and it is that there very well may be this universe, we know 13.8 billion years ago, which we've got the ability to take a photograph of within a nanosecond, is screaming something new is going on. And it's very likely that this universe is part of parallel universes. They're connected by wormholes, which begs the issue and keeps the view of the universe and reality synergetic. Buckminster Fuller made popular the term synergy that it was on nobody's lips maybe 50 years ago, and now it's on everybody's lips because it's the behavior of systems unpredicted by the sum of the parts. There's something more than the sum of the parts of a, let's say, maximally engaged system that is a resonancy that interaccommodates matter and universe. And it might very well be that we're coming to it. So that second law of thermodynamics is an anti-entropic function. The evolution of consciousness itself moves across entropy and brings increased pattern of conscious understanding to the process of which we are all a collective part. And that might be the purpose of evolution, which we now can understand how things came to be since the Enlightenment and Mr. Darwin and so forth. We could have an explanation that is free-thinking and is not based upon politically oriented creation stories that have gravitated human behavior in historical terms, okay? So we can have an understanding of that. And that's what is important, big-time stuff. And so it's still a synergistic universe. And even as we get to a point where, perhaps in our time, we get to a point where there will be a resonancy we're on the process of, it sounds crazy and so forth, but we're coming to the end of 200,000 years of the human experience. We're coming to the end of that. And what would one thing how would you measure, how would you deal with something like that? And in this time, Fuller and others did, that extension of consciousness that is the technology, okay, and there are implications of all of that, has reached the point, let's say, take it on a dialectic. On one side, we have the weapons of destruction that have evolved ever more lethal. They finally reached, according to modeling, they finally reached the point where, as in the past and as recently as the Second World War, they were impotent in a certain qualitative new way. The weapons, even in 1962 with the missile crisis, if you can remember that, it was absolutely frightened out of our wits. We were going to destroy most all of civilization by an exchange from Cuba and Russia. Okay, even at that, there would have been, as apparently, that was 62, but by 1970 is what the models come up with, that the weapon systems that exist, both nuclear and thermal, wave weapons, bacteriological weapons, the weapon systems by which political entities have been able to rule over on their story and so forth, became species lethal. That is, if they were to be unleashed, as they have been throughout almost all of human history, which is a nightmare, it would mean, apparently, don't even have to go to nuclear winter, but apparently, it have the ability to destroy the entire Homo sapiens species, and the modeling shows that, and it still exists, despite start and so on. Pardon?
What's it times?
I
40
can't-
times.
40 times. Okay, well, yeah. But the point being is, as recently as the Second World War, I was alive at the end of it. I remember we went. That was recent. It's just now. It was recent. We couldn't do that. We were impotent. We were gestating in our ability to fulfill or deal with the evolutionary process of which we were a part. So a qualitative new reality came in terms of capability. And you want to make a distinction between the reified institutions that makes up what's called reality, reported in the news and in the political process by and large, and the capability. It seems the whole evolutionary, somebody said, one of the candidates running for Republicans said it's a Ponzi scheme, or somebody said Social Security is a evolution is a Ponzi scheme in a certain sense because it's changing and evolving through time. And it's moving at 4 million years ago, there were no Homo sapiens, there were Australopithecine. We were contained within Australopithecine in a future way. We were to emerge in that. And then even when you get down to the contemporary, you get down to where you've got the extensions of our consciousness, the technology, our species lethal, okay? And then what on the positive side, or if there is, and this is some, on the positive side, would be existentially equally significant in an evolutionary sense to the fact that we now have finally, at the end of a long-running process, got the ability where we can stop the whole process. What would be equally existentially significant that would have political meaning and reality the way the news reports and everything? Buckminster Fuller, more than anybody else, in my humble opinion, and that's what the handout that I give you is about. I've got some graphs if you want to look. There's one, let me get it for you. Can you follow anybody?
Bubble.
Yeah.
Cut it.
Oh, no, don't worry about that.
We have to leave here at a certain time.
No, it's all right. Is it okay if I go on for a couple more minutes?
I hope so.
Trying to get at some things is a little hard to do.
Bubble, we must cut it short.
Margaret, stop worrying about it. You've heard me. Okay. There is a chart here. I brought 3 charts, really. Now we're getting down now
Bubble.
to never mind, Maggie. We're getting down to reality as a basic of grounding for that. And now we're getting down to, let's say, what's reported in the news, the reality of the moment, the Wall Street occupation, and the things that makes up the news and our concern with things. And the first chart, this is one, maybe I could hold it up, and it's one Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller was a comprehensivist, and out of the design science decade, 1965-75, they took a survey of the trends in human capability to develop. He had taken the idea of synergy, behavioral system. He had done a design science revolution outside of the political process, and they had made up a survey of our capability of humanity to provide a context where you would get a measurement of haves and have-nots. We talk about haves and have-nots in the world.
I will cut it.
Stop. Haves and have-nots. You get a way of measuring that. You'd have to have a definition of it. It's hard to get a definition of it, but he came up with it, and he said that we can see through this, coming into this century, that we get to a point that World War I, World War II, it's going exponential, that we were reaching a point, that we had reached a point where something on the order of 24%, and they're figuring. You can go check it out. We're haves. Now, it's very hard to do because it's ipso facto assumed that there is not nearly enough for everybody. In fact, that's been the principal context of accepted notions of realpolitik and of economic thinking and so forth. But he got that point, and he said we were heading in 1952. He wrote this. This is a result of his thing, his projection. He wrote this, and he said we had a 20-year period of imminent crisis. This was 1952. To where we were going to go, it got up to about 38% of the world population. That's world population, not the United States, not New York or anything like that. The world population in terms of a capability of providing life support. Okay, and they had it measured. You could check the criteria by which they do. You have to get definition of terms and all that. But he said we had a 20-year period of imminent crisis to when we would cross the 50% mark. And he said that we're going to be 20 years out from 1952. And he got to the point, and he said it was accelerated. It happened in 1970, the same year that the weapons became species lethal. We were transcending material scarcity.
Cut it.
You want me to cut it? Is there a time limit or something? Well, let's take a vote rather than whoever thinks that. You want me? I got another 15 minutes, maybe 10. Is that okay? Everybody say stop. I'm sorry. Am I boring you?
No.
Okay, you want me to continue? Then stop putting fingers in my face unless we have a deadline. Do we have a deadline? We have to
No,
leave?
may I interrupt
And
you and ask for a copy of that
I've got the copy. It's in your thing.
I
handed
didn't
out.
get one.
Oh, well, we'll sure get you one.
I'm
Here
sorry,
you go.
I'm sorry.
Here you go. That's all right.
Harold,
I don't.
could you also speak a little more about some of these other people you've met? And
Well, okay, if you want. Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. So then we get to that point. That's a premise. That's a premise that's put forth. That's the most important premise that you can possibly imagine that has political meaning. And it's never mentioned, if you notice. I'm just saying, I had this talk, I wanted to call attention to some major thinkers who give us some ways of looking at things like Wall Street and everything else that's going on in terms of a larger context. The idea that we actually may have, as a human species, with our given capability, actually transcended, for the future, material scarcity as an ontologic reality for the Homo sapiens species and the ecology. We've made a qualitative transformation on the living side. There's reference for that. It should be brought up in terms of the understanding that have some political relevance. That's the most important qualitative transformation in the history of mankind. A paradigm shifts that is never mentioned, and it's bothersome that it's never brought up, because everybody's all caught up in arguing, is it the Republicans, the Democrats, and the other kind of things, where we're looking at the current context. Current context is really, we were just talking with Lee at dinner, at breakfast, and he said, what determines right and left? And when we talk about politics, and the politics of the moment and so forth, it revolves around largely, if you look at it, it revolves around the private sector versus the public sector view of things. In terms of from the Enlightenment and the evolution of human institutions and so forth. And it's the private sector versus the public sector. And how do we deal with it as intellectuals? If we're comprehensive intellectuals interested in these questions, not just looking at sound bites on the news and looking at things in the normal way, is there a new context that could be introduced into the thinking? What does it mean that the kids, the youth all over the world, are going down to Wall Street trying to say we need something new? We have to see things differently than the intellectuals have fallen down on the job. My suggestion is they haven't been thinking about things comprehensively like our leading poets have asked us to do. We're just talking all about politics. And one of the questions is, for good or ill, we have to deal with the political realities that have evolved. And we've got down now to where we have a situation, and it comes down to economics. We have a lot of ruling, we have a lot of talk about things now, the jobs bill that Mr. Obama is putting forth, and the whole context, the left wing and the right wing, and and that sort of thing. I haven't introduced anyway, so there's that. My suggestion is that it is time for the intellectual community to have a serious discussion or thought or introducing of an idea or a context of thought into the environment to be considered by one and all, and it's not being introduced. So it's frustrating that it's not. So that's what I was trying to get across today, for whatever it's worth. It'll be in the multimedia, but it is around the idea of economics, ultimately. Private sector, public sector. And when you get to that, I was just talking with Lee at breakfast, like I said, when you get down to that comes down private sector, private property, government activity, and so forth. And I think that for whatever it's worth, the other graphic I have, I would put it up. I'm almost done, so I'm sorry people are bored.
Not at all.
Well, I don't know why they're telling me to stop. It's discouraging. Anyway, here's this chart. This is, I think that the state that intellectuals call them, I don't know any viable intellectuals that are really seriously in the right wing. I mean, it just seems to me that's the case. I mean, I just assume intellectuals are of what is called generally a progressive left wing, but there are exceptions. I think what is needed is this private sector, the private property principle, that we have a system in the United States, or in the world actually, you've got a tiny plutocratic class that owns all the capital assets. You can find graph after graph after graph. That's called 1%, 99%. It's accurate, it's true. the private sector ownership, or the ownership of the capital assets that are becoming increasingly responsible for production in a ratio with labor, is all owned by a tiny plutocratic class in every political entity, including the United States and the international order, and it seems to be accepted by everybody as adequate in terms of what the way we're going to figure out what we're going to do. I think if there's the book that I would recommend in terms of getting in touch with is one that is by Mortimer Adler, one of America's leading philosophers. Mortimer Adler, you're aware of Chicago books and everything. And then Louis Kelso is he was an economic theorist and so forth. But the title of the book is a very interesting one to put before, I would presume, the majority progressive-minded people within a free-thinking institution. The title of the book is The Capitalist Manifesto. I think it's time, as William Shakespeare said, for the progressives, it deals with the idea of, rather than reifying the labor theory of value and distributing all buying power to the mass of the people through their jobs in a context where all the capital instruments are owned by a tiny plutocratic class, we should democratize ownership of the capital instruments massively as a way of getting demand into the hands of the people to be able to clear the market. Keynes said, John Maynard Keynes, who set up the whole system that we're living under, said that you will be confronted with something in your maturity, the children of the grandchildren in 1930, he wrote it, that is hard to understand: massive, technologically induced unemployment. So one chart it would be good for you to keep in your mind: is there anything to what Bucky Fuller and all of his colleagues and much of the intellectual community, Robert Theobald and others, about the idea of capability, looking at capability, not the reality. It's always been and is unjust. The capability of transcending, there is enough. There is enough. That's really hard for people to get the sense of. That's a very qualitative transformation. That's what we need. We need a qualitative. And on the economic side, private property, we should hoist capitalism on its own petard. They say private sector, private property, this kind of thing. We have a system say, okay, it's a private property, we recognize it, embrace it, and so on, but hoist them on their own petard as a way of distributing, forming capital, accumulation, in a way that the ownership of the capital instruments are owned by everybody. You can go to Henry George, he wanted to do it, they wanted to have resources owned by everybody, that kind of thing. It was too early. Now, have it as a way of distributing demand, because here, this one, I've only got two of these. So here, is this chart true or not? This is another one. I put it in the thing, you can consider it if you will. I'm not looking for a little thing here, I'm looking for a big thing. And so that's a little, But anyway, this is here as a chart, and what it does is looking at the American economy, okay? 1776 here, and up to the present. And it's its relative input to production by labor and by all other things, technological instruments. In Tom Jefferson's day, labor was really important. You take a hatchet to cut down a tree. Okay? Labor, they had no manufacturing, none of that. We're coming out of a feudal order. We all know that, history. It was the beginning of the Enlightenment, okay? Steam engine was heralding an industrial revolution, which was coming and is now maturing into an information environment and so on. But it goes like this, and that he's projecting in reasonably markets that the current is probably 80%, 80 to 85%, and trending in that direction of the production in the modern way as it's evolving is not human labor, it's technological instruments. That's the direction. It is leisure that's going to have to be coming and opening up upon the goods of civilization, art and all the other things that take a second place seat to creating jobs for everybody on the estate. It's all owned by a small coterie of people around the world in each political entity That has to be challenged by the progressive community, and they're all caught up with saying how great it is to work on the estate owned by the people. It's rather like an attitude of a serf that was on a feudal estate, and the lord owned all of that, and that's the current thing. Rather than just singing how important it is for the work and to distribute income and buying power to the masses of the people, that's virtually everybody, through labor, which is what is done, it's always going to be there. But you need to have a different critique of it if we're not going to lead to a collapse of the world order, which will lead to irrationality breaking loose, which could lead to the one thing you really want to keep in mind as a responsible citizen is the unleashing of the ungodly species lethal weapon systems that are in the American arsenal. That's the major thought out of frustration, because they don't have a system that can link. And the kids down here are giving us a signal. They want something new. They don't want to talk about, give me a job. Or give me, what you're going to have to do is form capital in a unique way. It's something that can be brought into the political process. Those three charts. One last thing here. I'll shut up. Everybody's telling me to shut up.
No.
Well, they are. Why do they keep saying me to shut up? This other, and I'll stop. I'm done. I'm all done. I'm done. Okay? This is the ownership of tech. This is American, but both of these things are the American model, but it's representative of the world trend. Okay? So you took it in a world standard. But you got this. This is ownership of technology. And it says the labor worker, you get your money. You get some money because you do labor. Labor. Labor worker, individual or family is consumer unit earning no income or negligible income through ownership of capital. The capital is all concentrated. It's getting more so. And the left accepts it. They accept the premise. It's perfectly all right for the capital to be formed in a way where it gets concentrated the way it has. It's ridiculous. You got to have an alternative thing. And this is the ownership. 5% owned all the assets. And it went up with the Homestead Acts briefly in the United States, and then it leveled up. It's still, all the assets are owned by a tiny class, and we just accept that. We got to challenge that, and we hoist capitalism on its own petard, as Mr. Shakespeare said. Our ownership of capital should be a major way in which income is going to be of capital instruments and access to credit to have capital instruments of the technology that's producing wealth to everybody as a way of getting income, freeing them from wage slavery, not asking them to be accepted within it. And that has to be something that comes up within the progressive community in the interest of saving the world from destroying itself, in my humble opinion. That's spelled out in the paper. And those are the three graphs that I brought. And that's the context of what we're doing. It's going to be primarily done within what I call public access. I think it's multimedia is the way the thing is going to be done. It's very frustrating to watch the news and so forth, but I think it's going to emerge. I think it's going to emerge now, probably out of this question. Transcend scarcity, is it possible? Can you get an ontologic, systems critical thinking view of the reality of the universe within a system of understanding the physics of the universe and the whole larger issues, which is part of the intellectual challenge of humanity? And then secondly, is there anything to be said for the fact that within the context of evolution itself, which we now have a narrative for, we can understand things without the creation stories and the things we had to have coming out of history and so forth. We have that. Is that then able to see that we have more, that we have a qualitative transformation where there is enough. If we think 200 years out, we're still not going to be killing each other over who gets a piece of bread to eat. We're not even going to be thinking about it. We're going to be concerned with the goods of civilization, which are the goods of art and the major features other than making goods and services that can be done. When you get an algorithm, 500,000 people can be displaced. Let them be displaced, but you've got to have an alternate way of distributing buying power, or else the system will collapse. You need to have supply and demand in sync, simulfinancing. That's Mr. Kelso's projection. And he's coming from, I think it'd be wonderful to wade into the right wing with a book, The Capitalist Manifesto. You understand? Hoist that sucker on its own petard. And that's a strategy from the left that isn't being, from the intellectuals. And they're not seeing it, and so I'm frustrated, and I rant because I am frustrated. And I guess I should stop. They wanted me to stop because I know you're running out of time. But if anybody wants to ask any questions. If anybody wants to ask any question or come up and make statements, do. Okay, go ahead, in the back, lady.
I would say the most concentrated and to me important criticism of the Obama administration is that they have accepted the capitalist system whole hog.
I think we should accept it. We should accept the capitalist system.
But not the way it's working.
Exactly. But that's what hoisting it on their own petard is about. You say, private property. You're right, it's a wonderful idea. Let's get it to everybody. You see? That's hoisting it on its own. Don't try and fight the private, or don't try and say, go out and get a job for all these kids. They're not going to be jobs. Keynes said it's going to be massive technologically induced unemployment. They're going to be trying to get employment, wages, and all the rest of it.
We're the principal exponent of that right now.
Who is?
The United States.
I don't see an exponent of what?
In terms of the loss of industrial jobs, we don't have the old jobs that we used to have because they've been exported. And
there will be, yeah, the outsourcing is there, it's there, and when you can make, if you're a banker, and if you don't have a derivatives clause or something, and you can make 300% more profit by investing in some other place, and you've now got Walmart, and you've got the supply chain, and you've got containerization, you've got an internet, they cannot, by their board of directors, invest in the United States with all their higher wages and living wages and all the things the left's trying to protect. They're going to have to do it. So what you have to do is understand it from their perspective. But you can't allow them to say, oh, we're just going to we're job creators, in my humble opinion. See, that's the thing. The labor theory of value informed Marx and the whole left. Soviet Union, they did away with private property as the evil institution that caused injustice. So you got collectivization, 30 million people killed. The embrace the private property principle, hoist it on its own petard, and then go to Henry George and to Kelso, I would suggest, because he's got ways of financing and the way that the federal structure would be set up. You have to get in the federal structure a capital diffusion reinsurance corporation that will take the place of the swaps and derivatives that were done in the private sector and messed it up. Everything went in the private sector, partly because the left didn't criticize it. The government would be reassuring a commercially insured credit against good assets development of housing and the things that are needed. That can all be done. I'm sorry, but no, not capitalism. You've got plutocratic capitalism, and it's growing. It'll all be owned by the Koch brothers if we continue just thinking we're going to give everybody a job. Yes, she had her hand up, please.
Speak louder.
I really like your talk. I really
Oh, thank you.
Everything you said, but I can't quite understand how this is different from Marxism, that the people should take. How can you have capitalism and still have the people control the country?
Well, okay, there's a lot. I like Naomi Klein a lot. Have you read Naomi Klein? Shocked. Yeah. Naomi Klein's really good, I think. And she does not want Naomi Klein. Shocked democracy or shock capitalism. Shock doctrine. Yeah, it's good. She really writes well, really good. And she is I agree with her. We don't want one or the other. We want a mixed economy. We don't want to do away with the private sector. We don't want to do away with the government sector. Okay? You want a mixed economy. And the private sector has to be, the responsibility for the economic order is a matter of the government. You don't leave swaps and derivatives. If you're a banker and you make a contract for a $100 million water project and you don't have a derivatives clause, you'd be sued for malpractice. The derivatives were all in the private sector. It's all private sector. It's insurance against the vicissitudes of weather and other kind of currency fluctuations. The matter of risk is a big thing in terms of the way you handle it in the market. You want to bring that over into the government that allows the effective dissemination of ownership to safe things like housing, infrastructure, all the things that are safe, and don't make it a big crapshoot where the whole thing became seen as a crapshoot of people making a crapshoot in the private sector, run away. Can't do that. So you want to bring that risk. It's a little, next to the Federal Reserve, you have to have a thing called the capital diffusion. That means spreading capital ownership out to everybody, okay? spreading the capital diffusion out, capital diffusion reinsurance corporation like Lloyd's of London, reinsuring an industry that does commercially insured insurance against and the various levels of risk in the economic order. But it should be in the government, that reassuring thing of the industry, and it could be done on market principles. But it would be the government that's setting the context by which the economy is going to be ordered. And you don't leave all the risk-taking to be done by private sector entities who are going to make it into a crapshoot. Make it as though all the venture capital, I mean the venture things are all going to be put in with the same thing like housing and the things that are secure. Then make it so that you could have you're going to have to distribute demand, capital ownership. You can distribute private sector capital asset ownership by people as a way of them getting money, rather than they're working on the estate of the people who own all the capital. So it's different than Marx. Marx would do away surplus value of labor, or the labor theory of value is outdated in an age where the whole trend is for it to become extensions of our technological capability, and we'll be able to live. What you can see a picture of is people living comfortable lives with an income coming so that they can live and do what they want to do, not what some economic model says they have to do in a slave-like way to get money to feed the kiddies, which is what we're accepting now through this labor theory of value, saying their labor is so important. Can you understand? No, I'm sorry. It's not a little thing. Yeah. Yes, go ahead, follow.
I was wondering when you're talking about making the capitalistic, like Walmart, a co-op, or are you talking
Well,
about
maybe that thing going, I'm not sure exactly. What you need to do is get it politically relevant, in my opinion, in the United States political system. I think it's the thing for the Democrats to do. To say private property is great. Not say do away with it. The 1% are hoarding it all. They are. It's there. But what you do is, that's in keeping with the way things are being produced. They said we have to be subject to change. We're at a time of qualitative. You see, you get that idea there is enough. If you get the idea you can get enough, you can have an insurance system against building things that are going to be needed, and you have a sure way of providing it to the people in the future. Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, and all that. They had to fight for that and everything. So because that's been in place for a long time and everything. But we're coming to that now. And one of the Louis Kelso is the one who was behind. Russell Long was behind. You've got institutions. They set up institutions for trying to do this for what they call ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans. You may be aware it was something that came through in the 40s as part of ERISA in the government. Russell Long was in favor of it. Bill Simon, he was a conservative. Stanley Aronowitz was in favor of it. Other kinds, pardon?
The auto workers are trying to do that now.
Well, maybe they would have the ownership of it, but it was only the ESOP was only for the corporate enclaves. It's got to be much larger for the whole friggin' economy. The whole principle is being changed because the reality is being changed. The major thing that gives advantage in an evolutionary sense to Darwin's theory is those systems that are able to be susceptible to change. Okay? We have to change. And what we need is, if only for practical reasons, we have to have a way that can encompass the Republicans. And it's not, it's not winning against that. It's something you're going to hoist them and include them on the thing. Because you're talking about spreading capital ownership to everybody as a way of distributing income so that the people will have income to do what they want to do, like, say, paint or make art or make love or take care of their kids or do what they want, rather than having to be a wage slave on a system that doesn't need them, increasingly. And you don't want to encourage things that are going to make labor make work in order for people to do things because there's a 0.5% gain on the profit margin. That's not adequate to what the future requires. Yeah. Sorry, yes, sir. Wait, yes, sir.
I see Karl Marx up there.
Yeah. That's Mr. Lincoln, I think.
Karl Marx is smiling down upon you saying, bless you, my son.
Oh, I don't know. Well, Karl Marx was a great sociologist, and he had a great deal, and he also was in a different age. The thing is, in my thing is now, this is try to get the idea, this is not your normal time. This is unique. This is the water breaking. We're coming to a vision of our coming into a new relationship in the universe. We're transcending human conscious evolution. We're probably going to become, if we make it, and we get to a point where we can either liberate or annihilate the human species. That's a unique capability. How can we liberate it? That's got to do with some of the things about how you're going to get buying power and economic security and even the goods of civilization into the hands of the masses of everybody. So everybody's doing what they want to do rather than what they're being forced to do by all these ideas. There's not nearly enough. We got to be sensitive to world history. It's been a hard struggle at Mount Sisyphus. 200,000 years. And we've got, all the resources were there when we came out of the cave. It's changed. It's changed, and we're coming to, and evolution moves. 99.9% of all species have gone extinct. We're on the verge of being able at our own hand to go extinct in the evolutionary process and moving of anti-entropic function in the universe. It's a crucial time. And all they're doing is reifying the outdated institutions by which people get a political advantage or something. So we're reifying all our outdated institutions which have been qualitatively transformed around the year 1970. That's what we could focus on. Go ahead, Mr. Joseph.
What I'm hearing you to say is that there is a reality principle in capitalism and there is a reality principle in socialism.
Yeah.
Well,
then you go into these specific details which are so complex, controversial, and really vitally important. But what I think is the decisive issue is whether there will be a major influence in terms of Hitlerism or humanism.
Well, okay.
You know, that requires 2 separate lectures.
I know, I don't know if I put it there. I think it's either annihilate or eliminate. I think that's the way it's heading. If we, what do we do? We're putting drones all over them. It's like some terrible dystopic function, and all they talk about is they don't have a vision. The kids want a vision of qualitative new change. They're forcing it. They're forcing it. Thank God. I'm glad they got that thing going, because they're more in touch with the future. We need something that relates to the future rather than reifies the past. We have to make a transformation, and it's a really crucial time, because there's never been a time like this. We couldn't have done it in 1930. We couldn't have done it in 1917. We couldn't have done it any time until after about 1970. I think that's a candidate for a moment in the existential evolution of consciousness and universe that brought an altered situation that can inform what is reality in terms that aren't creation stories and the things that were invented out of history. Yes, sir.
You premised the string theory several times.
Oh.
It's theory on shaky grounds.
Yeah.
And if I may make a comment, physics has been a failure for the century in the quest of establishing a God equation. There's been an effort to have a unified theory.
Yeah.
And that's what string theory is intended for.
Yeah.
Also, CERN's attempt is to find God's particle.
Yeah, they say that.
To confirm the symmetry of leptons and fermions, to confirm the existence of subatomic particles and forces.
Right.
But all of these have been failed, even if we find the muons that we're searching for.
Yeah, right, you're right on the money.
Gravity does not fall into any of the unified equations. All the premises to this point always has been God's particle, God's equation.
Yeah.
So theologically, I don't believe we have progressed in the last 120 years since Gauss's equations.
All right, well, that's interesting. That's all there. I don't know. One of the things I'm quick to do is, I don't know anything very much about anything. Because, you know what I mean? One of the things that I avoid, for whatever it's worth, whatever, maybe it's a cop-out. I'm not particularly, no, I'm not very smart or anything, or intelligent or anything. But what I am is, I'm interested in the relationship between everything. So I'm looking at everything. So I don't know, and most of the time, the intellectual community has been co-opted. It's divide and conquer. The great pirates who run the world, they used to divide and conquer the peoples of the world as a way of gaining power, okay? The intellectual community has been co-opted into specialization. They equate scholarship with specialization. The term comes trippingly off the tongue. Jack of all trades, master of none. No sense thinking about everything. No sense thinking systems. We'll think systems, the people who run the world, and what we'll do is create, Mr. Fuller used to say it. He said they created graduate schools as a conscious effort to get the best minds coming. They're not worried about the dollars, but the best minds coming up, so specialized out on something. I've written a new treatise on the use of the pluperfect tense in 13th century French poetry in the southeast province of the province. And I know all about that. And I know all about this. And I know all about that. Everything is one system. So physics and economics and politics is all interrelated. Now, if you're doing that, everybody's getting their identity from the thing they know a lot about special. It just co-opts and makes innocuous the intellectual community. They're not doing their job. I'm sorry.
Well, you're not also talking about that everybody needs to get away from specialization. The specialization has its need.
You're right.
And it comes from a basic human emotion that people want to feel special and unique, and
right.
They have some value
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
To give.
Absolutely right.
But it's also, I understand your point about trying to spend more time and more effort and energy to understand the more basic interconnection that all of us has.
It's called I had a friend who was a banker. He took AOL private, but his dad was a cyberneticist, an intellectual. He was in the room with Norbert Wiener. 1948, when they came up in the room with the term cyber, because it was all Turing and all that early stuff leading to now with transforming the world. And it is like the evolution of pattern recognition. It's a term in science. It permits pattern recognition rather than specialization. What do you call it? Information overload, which we're involved with. Do you not agree with me? Every day it comes in Niagara and Iguazu combined combinations over the transom about understanding the world in a way. A couple hundred years ago, it took them 10 decades to invent a tack. It was moving so slow. Now it's going L-shaped, and it's going existential. But information overload permits pattern recognition rather than special case. It permits pattern recognition. So you can see patterns. We can begin to see patterns now of things in increasingly systems, critical thinking, intellectually based way that we have simply not been able to have for 200,000 years of our evolution. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're going to need. We're going to have to anchor to history. We're not going to just say goodbye history and all of our architecture is out of date, all of our thinking, and practically every institution we have that holds us together is out of date. With what Nietzsche said, it could have been somebody else, the future influences the present as much as the past. We're enthralled to the past as always have been. And we're going to have to anchor to history, yes, but we need to have a pattern that relates to the future. Homo sapien was contained within Australopithecine 4 million years ago. There is a time factor, and that time comes to where there's a qualitative trend. It's called punctuated equilibrium. We're coming, Stephen Jay Gould and Eldridge, punctuated equilibrium, the way the new emerges. So we got to start incorporating links between all of these different things, and that's called comprehensive. That's what Mr. Fuller was. That's what I try to be, but I don't know a lot about anything. You know, the expert. Economics is far too important to be left to the economists, I'll tell you that. Or any other specialization. Yes, ma'am. Well, go on. You coming now?
Thank you very
much. No.
Thank you, Harold, for every moment, every word. Two references to paraphrase what you've been saying and then a question.
Yeah.
Gurdjieff wrote a book called All and Everything.
With Ospinski?
Gurdjieff
Yeah, but
was
with
Ouspensky's
Ospinski.
teacher.
Yeah.
He was Gurdjieff's, Ouspensky's teacher.
Yeah, okay,
but
yeah.
his volume, speaking of
Okay,
everything, is
yeah.
called All and Everything.
Uh-huh.
And then there's a very important blueprint for where we are now by a woman named Elizabeth H. called The Initiation.
Thank you.
Do you know that book?
No, I don't. I would like to.
It's that big, and it'll take you less than an hour to read it.
Uh-huh.
And it's about the 2,000-year cycles.
2,000 years, okay.
Yeah, and it's a much shorter time span than you're talking about. But she explains unquestionably, undeniably, that right now, you know, each 2,000-year cycle revolves around the element earth, air, fire, water.
Okay.
And we are now in between, and this is scientific now, because, I mean, it can be compared scientifically between Piscean and Aquarian.
Okay,
It's not the flower children that sing about this, it's true.
Yeah.
And the Piscean, all the technology and the travel and everything was water, and now, of course, everything is air.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
Obviously, and
That's true,
between
yeah.
one and the other is a cusp, like 200 years, like there is a cusp in a month, where nothing works. And so everybody that clings to have a script to the old systems is out of date because it doesn't work. And the visionaries are considered crazy, and the people in the middle go crazy.
Look what they did to Galileo.
Probably a cusp time.
Yeah.
But we are now entering the Aquarian age, maybe it's 2050 or something like that. There's several dates being given.
I hope
But-
we have to 2050. I'm afraid we're going to blow it up before we get to
Well, it's a
stage
race.
one. Carl Sagan talked about
It's a race, because if you read this book, you'll see the promise that is coming, and it's here already. 'cause
I've
you
done
can see
programs
it.
a lot with Michio Kaku. He's very good at making science and physics and so forth available to the layman. Not to the experts, but to the layman. And he knows. And he says Carl Sagan was great. Great friend of Lynn Margulis is great. His former wife, she's a great biologist. And his son Dorian's a good friend of mine and everything. But he said, well, you'll get to phase one. It's about 70 years out that we will finally get to the point where we'll be, some of these things I'm talking about will become relevant in terms of evolution developing in the old way, reifying all these things. I'm saying to him on the thing, we ain't got that long to get to phase one that you're going to see in terms of the physics of the universe.
But it's happening so fast now.
Now it is.
It is
That's
happening
the point.
so fast.
Speed
And
it up.
Read this book, it's a blueprint.
What is the book's name again?
It's called The Initiation, Haich, and she was the person, I think it's translated into 17 languages at least.
Okay, good.
Haich. But the question I wanted
Yes,
to ask
please.
you.
What's her name again? Let's get it on the tape. This is what you should all be talking to. This is where it's going. This is the way you reach people, is to tell them that man's the most important man in the room.
Well, this is one of the most important books I've ever read in, and as I said, it's that thick. It'll take you no time to read it. Elizabeth H. Haich. She was
H-I-C-H?
H-A-I-C-H.
Elizabeth as the queen.
She was a historian. She was Austrian, and she was a healer and a guru teaching in either Switzerland or England. I think it's Switzerland.
Okay, what's the question, my darling?
Okay. And was it in the 70s? Well, there's a difference now, and I agree with everything you've been saying, and I have been trying to create the solutions in my own head between jobs and activity.
Right, yeah.
And as you say, there's an imbalance now between people available and jobs available, but it's never going to stay the same.
Well, that's what Lord Keynes predicted, yeah.
Right. So wasn't there some system in the 70s that proposed giving birth sustainable?
Well, you had Robert Theobald and the Triple Revolution, and they were talking. It was blowing in the wind. 17. Bob Dylan was right on the money with his poetry, I think. I think 1970 is going to be remembered. It's a good candidate to become considered in the fullness of time, year one. It's not going to be 2011. And it's not 5,772 in the Jewish calendar. You know what that stands for?
No.
That's when the beginning of the universe was. Everything began the year 5,772. That's the creation stories. The Eskimos have one about a polar bear. You know, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be, but I think we have to respect the spiritual traditions and everything, because my God, people have lived in such a dire straits, and they had to have some sort of understanding of dealing with the self-reflective consciousness, asking what's it about. They had to have something, and so we've done it. They needed that. They have Vedic, you have the Rig Veda and all the stuff out of Egypt, I mean out of India and all that, and there's all these different stories that are outdated. But you have to respect them, and the historical institutions are outdated, but you have to anchor to them.
But wasn't there a motion given in
Yeah,
the
Robert
notes
Theobald, the Triple Revolution was an idea.
to give financial, I don't know what you call it, upon birth, a birthright, a financial sustainability.
Well, that was also, I think, basis of Henry George. That was, you know, Mark Twain and all those major thinkers were in favor of all resources being owned by the people. And you have that thing in Spain, Madrigal or Mondragon, the co-op thing, where the ownership becomes the ownership. You have the ESOP, which is there. There's an association. There's some precedent you could build upon with the idea. But the major thing is to get out of this. Oh, an activity. I used to be a professor, for whatever it's worth, and I'm mentally ill. I'm mentally ill. I swear to God. I really, no, I am. I'm mentally ill, and I happen to be, I don't know where it came from or something, but I'm pathologically anti-authoritarian. I hate authoritarianism with a passion. And I was a professor at a number of universities, and I got a thing on my site you can go to if you want to. It says Synergetic Educational Manifesto. In 1970, I was a professor. I had been at a number of universities. We put Mr. Ray, I was out in California, and we had a big contretemps with Mr. Close the university down at Long Beach with Mr. Reagan up in Sacramento, and that Vietnam War with napalm. It burned to the bone, 4 million people killed. It was a whole, anyway, I was there, and they used to come into the class, and I got a friend of mine. I believe in public access in terms of multimedia. George Stoney's the godfather of that. He's a wonderful man, 92 years old. He's been doing it forever. Great filmmaker. And he complained, we did a program and he brought it up. It's gotten worse and worse and worse as the students come in, the young people come into the class. It's a class on filmmaking, okay? And the first thing they ask him now, it's gotten worse. You was there when I was there. But it was back in 1970, so it's way back. But he said, they come in, they say, Mr. Stoney, what do I have to do to get an A in your class? I have to get it on my transcript to get into Harvard Business School so I can make some money. And that's outer directed. What do I have to do in order to get what you're doing? That's wrong. What they should be doing is pursuing knowledge for the joy of the knowledge. Autodidactic, they're really interested. They're not free to do that because the economic system is so enslaving. And now they come out with debt. Universities are going to close down. Maybe it's good if they do. They're just all co-opted by specialization. But the thing is, I used to do what I did. I got into trouble for it because every day when I started a new semester in September, they would come into the class and I'd say, as far as I'm concerned, you're all A's. I'll give everybody an A right now.
You got an A right
I
now
will be here every day.
Here.
I will come every day if you want to come. I want to get rid of the authority, if you can understand. Yeah. Get rid of it. But that's like a cop. That's authority. That's training people to become wage slaves. Answer to an authority figure. Okay? I said, I'll give everybody an A. I'll be here if you want to come. And what happened is the drones went away. They said, I got my A. I'm going to get my, you know, and I don't want them anyway. But they would do that. And then my class got filled with the smartest people on campus. And it had nothing to do with the institutional structure. You see? And we made a lot of trouble. We closed the university down. Mr. Reagan up in Sacramento then, and we did it. They fired me finally after 3 years at Newport. But that's what's happening now on the internet. I got some things. I got an autodidact corner on my site where you can go and you can learn all kinds of great stuff. You don't have to listen to some guy ego tripping on one aspect of a discipline, which is what they do in the name of scholarship, and then they're going to get tenure. It's not going to work. The educational system totally sucks, and there is no department of everything. That's absurd, ipso facto. I'm specialized on the use of the pluperfect and
Harold,
I think that relates to what you're saying.
We're going to have to stop soon.
Oh, okay.
We've got a grade A from everybody here, I think. But before you stop, perhaps you would just talk a little bit in concrete terms about someone like Kurzweil. I tell you why I mention him as such.
Yeah.
He is someone who can take the work away from people, but it can be used either way. It can be a double-edged sword, and at the same time, the computer can get us closer to looking at things from a distance, out of the box. And I was wondering if you could just
I love Kurzweil. I did
a little bit about Kurzweil. And
I love Kurzweil. I've got a little page in my context. It's Buckminster Fuller, Lewis
May I
Kelso,
interrupt
Kurzweil.
for a moment?
Yeah.
Mr. Kurzweil came out with a partner of his on a health book, How to Live to Be Over 100.
Yeah, he's done that recently.
To work.
I've done programs with Kurzweil. I did a program with Kurzweil in 1974.
Just to live and live and live.
When I lost the job at the university, I started doing public access. It's the longest running series in the country on public access. That's free. You can go there and you don't have to be doing anything for money. Imagine that. You can do something where you don't have to get a grant. You don't have to be concerned with money. They've got it set up. But I went and I did a program with Kurzweil way back in 1974.
But how should he be regarded now?
He's great. I think Kurzweil is really good. I like Kurzweil very much. The singularity is near and all that.
But at the same time, the computer can take the jobs away in a dangerous way. If
the technology, listen, why don't you get off that? You don't want, what they should do is you don't want jobs. Don't think jobs, Mr. Obama. I mean, you have to. And the man is you have to have, there's going to be jobs, you have plumbers, there's going to need to be, but it completely co-opts the whole working class by thinking that if this thing is correct, this is this chart. If this is correct, labor is going to the vanishing point in terms of goods and services in the economy, world economy.
It's another
the labor's input. You know, the guy on the line in the assembly line. It'll be done by an algorithm. You don't need it. Leisure is coming. Comfortable leisure society of people who can be concerned in doing autodidactically what they want with their family and not be having to go like a slave down to the quarry to do something that the boss man says they have to do in order to let the kids eat.
We really have to stop.
May I comment on a misconception? To me, the computer is neutral. It's the person in back of it or whoever wants to use it for whatever reason.
It's how it's used.
Not the computer.
It's how it's used. And certainly it can be used for the good.
It's not how it's used, it's how the people who own the computer want you to use it.
Exactly.
So don't blame the computer.
But you can take the picture of the singularity as Ray Kurzweil has it, and you could assume that that is the one where the number of hours people work is put there. It would be the same graph. You know what I mean by that?
It would be similar, I think. He's very good, but it's not just the computer. That whole process has been characteristic since we came out of the cave.
Yeah.
It's still the same. It's coming, but it's.
I think you misunderstood me.
There's been a change from when we came out of the cave 200,000 years ago and 1970. That's the point. There's a new thing, and that's what the kids are picking up on. And it's so frustrating to go into one of the subparts of what the frig is going on when it was better to look at the whole thing.
I think we're still in the cave.
Well, maybe, but I'm very worried. It's very existentially significant. What a time to be born. What a time. It is the most challenging time ever. And we really ought to get on with it. The intellectuals are falling down on the job. The secular humanist intellectuals are falling down on the job. Because that's where it would come from. That's where the thinking would come from, and they're just going, and I mean, the intellectuals are falling down.
We're just feeling good.
Pardon?
We're just feeling good.
Just feeling good. Anyway, I guess I ranted on, so you can take these things if you want. And good luck with the organization.
speak again.
Well, whatever. I don't know.
Listen, I think we're going to get Harold to speak again sometime if he's willing.